Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Erica.
Okay, so today you are our guest co-host.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you, and I realize that we need our own intro before we get into the episode because there's some context for your story.
Yeah, that's why I'm here.
So, Jenny, just for context, we went to the same high school, but she has a favorite thing to share.
We weren't friends.
We were not friends. And then we ended up going to the same college. And then we ended up being roommates. And besides Ramsey, you're my favorite roommate ever.
Thanks, I'm honored. You're my favorite too.
That's so sweet. I feel like an interviewer that I have to like pass the microphone off.
It's weird. I can come closer.
Yeah, maybe we should just like cuddle up. And Miles, Jenny's son, is currently on the floor.
He's chilling though. You might hear some noises.
Okay, so we're bringing on Alyssa, and she runs an account called Healthy IVF. And the reason why we thought Jenny would be like a really good guest co-host today is one, Jordy is undergoing her trial and she's like literally out of commission. And two, Jenny has some personal experience. So, Jenny, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about why this is close to you.
Yeah. So before I got pregnant, I had to get tested for cystic fibrosis, since my mom has cystic fibrosis. So I was tested, found out that I was a carrier. And then since I was a carrier, we had to see if Graham was a carrier. Turns out he was, which was a shock, very unexpected. I remember getting the call that he was a carrier of cystic fibrosis, and he was in a meeting, and I just like got in the shower and cried because I realized our journey to having a child was going to be a lot different than we anticipated.
Yeah, and I remember getting the call from you and asking, like, you're trying to figure out. Well, it turns out well because we have the product of an IVF embryo right next to us, making lots of noises. And you knew that you were going to get tested regardless because of your mom, but you also went to an OB. And you were like, hey, I'm a carrier. Or no, you're like, hey, my mom has cystic fibrosis. You went to the OB and you called me afterwards and you said, I told my OB that my mom has cystic fibrosis and I asked her if I should get tested. And her response was,
ignorance is bliss.
Yeah. And like, well, if it wouldn't change anything, like, why even get tested? Like, it was not really medical advice. It seems like it was a very personal opinion. And when you told me that, I was raging because I knew that this wasn't medical advice of like, that's not on her to tell you ignorance is bliss. It's on her to say, here are all your options. What do you want to do?
Yeah. And the funny thing about that is that I went to that whole appointment. She told me that and followed that conversation by telling me that she no longer practices OB. She's just a gynecologist now. So the entire appointment was pointless.
Correct. And then I remember just thinking, like, you need to get tested. Like, there's a chance he could be a carrier. But at that time, we really didn't think it was possible that, like, Graham would be a carrier for cystic fibrosis. I mean, it's literally so rare that both of you would be carriers and then you'd find each other to then get pregnant.
Yeah. And not knowing that obviously if he's a carrier, somebody in his family had to be a carrier, and that was completely unknown. He has a large, like lots of aunts and uncles as well, and you'd think that it would have appeared somewhere. And we're just, I guess you could say, unlucky.
Right. So then you found out that both of you were carriers and you actually had a genetic appointment where they told you like the severity of both of your genetic factors. And I remember correct me if I'm wrong, that like together you would have had like one of like the most severe forms of cystic fibrosis.
Yeah. And I don't remember the specific details and um, whatnot, but they did say it would be severe. And I think it was at that point that I reached out to you.
Mm-hmm.
Reached out to as if we didn't talk every day. um, and I remember specifically asking if you, what did I say?
Oh, I remember. I think you said something along the lines of it. Do you think terminating for medical reasons would be less traumatic if it were earlier on in a pregnancy? And I was like, absolutely not. It's really not about the timing. The idea of like wanting a baby and then making the decision to not have a baby is like a really traumatic position to be in.
Yeah, I think I remember asking you these questions because obviously when you were pregnant with Shayla, you didn't go into that pregnancy thinking there could be a genetic
Right.
issue or there could be, you didn't know about terminating for medical reasons at the time. And after seeing you go through it, I saw what you went through and
Yeah.
I I didn't want to go through that, but I was curious to hear if you were expecting potentially bad news from the start, do you think it would be easier?
Right. And I think like very clearly was like, yeah, no, it really doesn't matter. But then I knew of this Facebook group about genetic carriers and was just trying to give you all the information because I really did not want you in this position. I'm like, I know the pain. I don't want anyone to be in this position and not someone like I love so much. And so I was trying to like give you all the information so that you wouldn't ever be in this position. And I didn't know how to do it without like being so overbearing.
I mean, it wasn't overbearing. You created my college class schedule for me.
So you knew what to expect.
I knew I could count on you to give me all the information, even though, I mean, you'd never been through this exact thing.
Fair. So yeah, and then you went through IVF and you like responded pretty well. I mean, like you were like such a trooper throughout the whole process.
I think we were just eager and excited to get started and going into it, knowing that, we were fortunate that we weren't there for fertility related issues. And it was specifically just to get, healthy embryos that weren't going to be born with cystic fibrosis. So we were ready to go and I was eager. And I think, yeah, it worked out. It went well.
Yeah, and I remember too, like they give you like statistics of, okay, this is what we think of how many like embryos you'll have that are healthy, and you got your numbers back, and it was like, oh my gosh, thank God you did IVF because there were a number of like unhealthy embryos.
Yeah, they told me that. So, with both of us being carriers, there's a 25% chance of a baby being affected with cystic fibrosis. And we got 19 embryos and sent 15 for testing. Um, now you're putting me on the spot because I don't remember exactly how many, but it came back.
Oh, I thought it was like 40% or something.
I do think it was about 40% came back affected. Yeah.
So not great statistics when you're thinking about like bringing a child into this world. But then I wanted to support you and like haven't gone through IVF myself and didn't really know the experience that you were going through. But I knew that I was following healthy IVF because Alyssa went through IVF. She had a termination for medical reasons and then did a lot more IVF and sent you to do a consult with her so that you could get some prep before or just some support of someone who's been through it before.
Yeah, she was fantastic. I started following her page when you told me about her, or probably about when I started my journey. And there's a lot to learn. And, I finally found an OB that I trusted, and she's fantastic. But there's still so much that they don't tell you. And, a fertility clinic that they do this every day. And, they run through their checklist of things to say, but there's so much more to know before going into it. And Alyssa
Right.
provided that.
And even like little things that don't seem like as, I don't know, just like the support in general, like wear socks to keep your feet warm, like eat warm foods, like clinics usually don't do that, and you really have to be your best advocate. So I just thought we thought it'd be really fun to do this together.
Yeah, I'm honored.
So without further ado, here's our episode with Alyssa, also known as Healthy IVF, and you can find her on Instagram. Okay, well, it's really nice to talk to you in this kind of setting, Alyssa, because I've never actually spoken with you face to face before.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I thought we're doing things a little bit differently today. So Jordy's actually in the hospital right now. She got her experimental infusion yesterday, and she's pretty not doing so well at the moment, which is as expected. She's tired, has a pretty gnarly headache. She hasn't like opened her phone in 24 hours. So
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's part of it, but there would have been no way she could have gone on. But then I was talking to Jenny, who's a childhood friend, and she went through IVF, and you two have connected. So we thought, like, what better guest co-host than Jenny? So I just thought this could be a really fun way for the three of us to connect.
Yeah, definitely.
So I know that there's a lot to your story, Alyssa, with your reproductive journey. And I'm wondering if you could just highlight a few things about like your story and how you got married and how you wanted to start family planning, and then where you are right now.
Yeah, so we got married in, I don't even know, 2017, I think, or engaged in 2017, married in 2018. And pretty much started trying, we got married at the very end of 2018, pretty much started trying right away. My husband was like the one who was like, can we, have a baby before we even get married? And I was like, I don't want to be pregnant on my wedding day. Like, no, let's just enjoy. Let's like go to Europe for our honeymoon, have fun. But we started trying right away. And after about 6 months, we weren't getting pregnant, and we knew that like I was ovulating and everything was fine there. So we were just a little bit concerned. I have a really, really weird, interesting anatomy. So I have 2 uteri, and they kind of always said, like, we don't know. It's very rare. We don't really know. Every case is so unique. So just try, and if we need to, pursue intervention, we will. So,
and did you know that you had 2 uteri before family planning?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
That was like very obvious to my doctors when I had my first pap smear, and they had done a little bit of a non-invasive procedure, just like put me under to kind of like explore and figure out like what my anatomy was. And so all of my doctors were aware of that, and, we just didn't know how it would impact things. So, we pretty much after 6 months, we were just like, you know what, we don't want to wait any longer. We just decided to go private and just find an RE and a clinic nearby. Both of my sister-in-laws had done, one did IUI, one did IVF, and they went to the same clinic here in San Francisco. So we just booked an appointment, and the doctor was great. He was like, I think IVF is your best option. Let's not waste our time with IUI for your anatomy. It doesn't make sense. Let's just put an embryo in and get going.
Did they tell you the odds or statistics on having a baby with 2 uteri versus 1?
There aren't a lot of statistics. It's pretty rare. And it's so unique in every case, because it's not just you have 2 uteri, it's the shape of the uteri that matters. It's how the 2 uteri are either fused together or separate. Mine are completely separate. It's whether there's a septum, it's whether there's so many different components to it that it's really hard for them to tell you. you go onto a Facebook and you can do a poll, and women are like, I had 0 issues, got pregnant naturally, no problem. And then other women are like, well, one of my uteri is really small and I gave birth too early. And then other women are like, I had to go through IVF. So it really is it's not black and white. There's so much gray. And it's really hard to tell from ultrasound. I had MRIs, I had ultrasounds. Really the only way to know is through a lap surgery, because they can actually look inside and down and measure things, but they don't want to just do a lap surgery for every woman that comes in. And I have had a few of those since starting IVF, but there were no statistics. It was like, we're going to try. We know that this works best, placing an embryo into the uterus. We know that you have 2 fully separate uteruses, and let's just try and go from there. The thing is when women have 2 uteri, it can be genetic, or it can be actually every embryo starts out with 2. And as the fetus grows, they fuse together. And so it could just be something that happened when, the fetus is growing. In my case, it is likely genetic, but they still can't necessarily pinpoint it. So it's just really hard. There's not a lot of research around it. And I'm actually at a major research hospital here in San Francisco, and even they it's just so unknown, kind of.
Which is so hard to not get the statistics and not to get the information of we know someone who, we know many women who have had your exact anatomy. This is what it looks like. There's so many unknowns.
Well, it's just telling that the gray area can be so much more difficult than a black and white scenario.
Yeah. It's hard. And I saw one of the top doctors in the world at UCSF for women's health. And he was the first doctor who ever operated on a pregnant woman, and was so well-versed in everything. And even he was I can't tell you. But for me, we didn't focus on the why. We focused on our end goal. And it didn't necessarily matter to me why I am the way that I am and how we were going to get to the end goal. We just wanted to get to the end goal. So we started IVF, and our first transfer worked, and we were very lucky. Had 0 issues. I did a cycle. We got 12 normal embryos, transferred the first one. It was a little boy. It stuck, and I was pregnant. And the thing with 2 uteri, you're considered high risk. So you're seen by an MFM and an OB, and also usually have a midwife too. So you have a whole team. And I was seen very closely. Nothing was wrong. Everything was fine until we got to 16 weeks. And then they started telling me that they were having trouble seeing the baby, and they didn't know if it was because my uterus was presenting a certain way, or if because it was growth with the baby. And long story short, after almost 10 weeks of ultrasounds, whole exome gene sequencing, amnios, microarrays, so many MRIs, ultrasounds, specialists, hours and hours and days at the hospital, we found out that my baby had a genetic defect. And it was maternal, so he had gotten it from me, and it most likely was the reason why I had 2 uteri. It presents very differently in women, but impacts males severely, and basically they stop growing. So our baby just wasn't growing, and that is when we had to make the decision of okay, are we going to allow this baby to continue to not grow and potentially put him at risk and me at risk, or are we going to have to end the pregnancy for medical reasons? So with the help of dozens of care team specialists and advisors, we did have to end the pregnancy right before 24 weeks. And then we kind of had answers as to why I am the way I am.
Did they give you that possibility? I know you weren't seeking out why.
No, it's very, very rare. That wasn't even on their radar. And then once it was, the genetic counselor was kind of oh, I'm not super surprised, but you really don't see, women can go their whole lives with never having an issue with it, because of how it can present. And it just can present itself in so many different ways. So yeah, it was kind of like, okay, for me, it was like, we have the answers for our son, which was the most important thing for us. And we knew that like he wasn't okay. And so that really helped. Like we wanted to make sure that he was okay and wasn't suffering. And then when we moved forward, we wanted to make sure that we were never put in that position again. So it was very helpful that we had those answers.
So, and Alyssa, we're like similar in the way where like our timeline is exactly the same. Like I ended my pregnancy 23 weeks, 5 days. So also just before 24
like
weeks.
Right before that 20-week mark. I feel like they're just always racing against the clock
They're racing against the clock. And the difference though is I have no answers. And they did the array. They did the, well, actually they didn't do the MRI for me because they told me it was in her brain that like they wouldn't be able to see the things that they needed to see at that point, which they said the imaging they had was good enough. But we saw enough that like her brain hadn't grown. So I'm just curious for you of getting the answer back. Like, what do you think that did for you?
Well,
was that harder, easier?
We did a whole exome gene sequencing.
Right.
And that was the only thing that found the actual cause. And it was really important for me because we were doing IVF and I didn't want, basically they said, if we didn't have an answer, we would advise you to only transfer female embryos and do IVF. And since we were able to get the answer, it basically allowed us to test all of our embryos, which was just added cost and time, but it was really worth it for us. I would say it definitely helped then it took me like 4 years to get pregnant, or 3 years to get pregnant again, but it definitely helped when we were doing IVF. Like I knew, even though it wasn't 100%, I knew that like there was only a 2% chance that any embryo we transferred was a carrier of that. And for me, it's not a carrier. Like you are affected if you have it. It lives on the X chromosome. And so I just kind of like that, I think helped give me a lot of peace throughout my pregnancy. I didn't mean to get pregnant with another boy. I didn't want to know. I was very obsessed with, and I don't know if you went through this, I was very obsessed with getting pregnant with another boy right away. I needed that. And then it wasn't working. And then I kind of threw my hands up and I was like, I want a girl. Like, I'm just never going to be a boy mom. And then I was like, I don't care what I am. Like, I just want to be a mom. I'll say when I found out I was pregnant with another boy, which we found out around like 14 weeks, I was like so anxious. It was really hard because I was like watching him so intensely.
Well, like, I remember when you posted the sex, I actually remember there's this book called Rebirth, and it goes through like being pregnant after loss and how the sex of the fetus like brings up so much for parents, and how some parents really want the same gender. Other parents want like a different gender because it's like, oh, well, this is a completely different experience. I think for lost parents, there's so much tied to that because our brain is just trying to create patterns and find answers where there really are none.
Yeah. And I think like, I don't know if you went through this, but I was so obsessed with having a boy after. Like I needed to have a boy. And I like went through all these cycles of different like feelings. And towards the end, I was just like I said, I don't care. Like I just wanted a baby. But then when we did the gender reveal, I remember just being so shocked because I hadn't allowed myself to think that I could even have a boy. I was in such shock. And my mom, I just remember my mom being like, I can tell you are so anxious right now. Because it just changes everything for you, especially like for us. I knew that my condition would severely impact a male, whereas a female could have it, but like she may just go through what I go through, which is nothing in comparison to what our son went through. So in utero. So for me, it was like really tied to the gender.
Did you know at that point through genetic testing that this baby was not a carrier?
There's like a 98% chance. So I actually just got a message from a woman the other day who said, we are the small percentage. And because the issue is that genetic testing on an embryo is so tricky because they're testing the outer rim of the embryo. They're not able to it's not like an amnio where they're actually taking like DNA. It's very tricky, and they've come so far, and they're pretty good, but it's like any test you like an NIPT, right? Like even there, I think like 99% or 98%, there is always that small chance. And I think like when you are already the 2%, the 1% over and over, like so like for so many things, I was that small percent that I was like, well, why wouldn't I be again? Right.
Of course.
And I was so scared that I actually even had an amnio in my son's pregnancy because I was terrified of being that 1%.
For sure. That makes 2%. Sense.
So I had the amnio, and the amnio is diagnostic. Nothing else is, as I'm sure you know, Erica, nothing else is diagnostic except for the amnio. So I needed that like confirmed diagnostic report telling me that he did not have it.
Yeah, it's so terrible. Like how terrifying to go through all those steps. And for you, let's say it was on your 9th transfer?
Yeah, our son, Jordan was our 9th transfer. So I went through, and I had losses in between that too. I went through 9 transfers to get him. He was going to be our last transfer. And then I had already spoken with a gestational carrier, and we had planned on transferring into her in December. And I was just like, I'm going to give myself one more chance. And it worked.
Yeah, I have chills. I'm like, so happy that it worked. And also when I think about there are people like some moms like make the decision prior to 9 transfers to stop transferring because it takes such a toll on your body. And I know, Jenny, for you, like you were able to bring a baby home after your first transfer. And so I'm curious, Jenny, for you too, if you have thoughts around like the transfer process, because it's like, how do you make the decision of like when your body has had enough? Like, how do you even go through that decision-making process?
I couldn't even imagine. And I'm so glad, you have Jordan. I feel so fortunate and lucky. And I feel like I don't necessarily fit the mold of a lot of people that have gone through IVF. We did it for genetic testing purposes only. It worked on the first try. And I don't feel guilty saying that, but it hurts my heart to know that, what other women go through and might not walk away with a living child.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's so hard. It's like, you only know what you know, and the first transfer is so scary, and you don't know much, and you sometimes are really naive, and then sometimes you're just terrified, and it's like the longer you do something, the more familiar it is to you, right? But then also the scarier you get that it won't work. But when you've had it work, it's like, in my mind, it was like, well, I was pregnant. Like the pregnancy didn't end because my body wasn't capable. The pregnancy ended because my son was sick. So it was like, like, I know my body can do this. So that was like fuel for me, right? Of like, let's keep going. But I know very few people who do more than 5 transfers. A lot of women just go straight on to gestational carriers after something like that. But I think no matter what, your first transfer is so scary and hard.
Yeah. I mean, I never went through IVF, but I remember after Shayla died, I met with a reproductive endocrinologist. Just like I had 2 very early miscarriages and then this, but we had no genetic reason. And they're like, well, you could do IVF, but it doesn't account for what happened to your daughter. And so I remember like, wow, not even IVF could possibly be the answer. But I had the same thought as you, Alyssa, of like, okay, my body was able to do it.
Yeah.
It wasn't my body. I had in my mind of like, okay, if I have one more miscarriage, if I go through, like, I'm going to be done. It was like creating limits with yourself. But now after I had a living child and I was wanting to bring another living child, the process felt so different. Like, it was emotionally a completely different experience. And I know you're heading into IVF again, and I'm just wondering if you can speak to where you're at with that.
Yeah. Can I follow up Erica's question too? Because you said that, your 9th transfer was going to be your last one. And now having Jordan, is that where the mindset change came from in, attempting to give Jordan a sibling rather than going the surrogate route?
My first doctor wanted us to use a gestational carrier after my 6th transfer resulted in a miscarriage. And then I went to a new doctor and he was like, I'm fine. I want to try again with you. But even then, after the 8th, he was kind of like, I'm okay if we continue to transfer into you, but I really would love for you to find someone in case that's the route we need to go, because he's like, you have told me that no matter what, you are going to be a mom. So let's just put it all out on the table. If you cannot get pregnant again, how do you want to become a mom? Is that adoption? Is that gestational carrier? Like, how do you want to get there? And I was like, well, gestational carrier with embryos that we've already created. And he was like, okay, then let's work on that alongside your transfer. I think that, and he was always like, that this doesn't mean that we can ever transfer into you in the future. It just means we're giving your body a rest. You've done 8 transfers. You've had multiple surgeries. You've had so many procedures and losses. Like, let's give your body a rest. Let's get you a baby here our side. And then let's reevaluate. Do you want to try it again on you? So it was kind of like I was never shutting the door on my body. I just kind of was like, okay, seeing this woman as like someone who can help me get my first living child here. And then we could reevaluate. And take the pressure off me too. Getting a gestational carrier was so helpful for getting the pressure off me because I had a plan. I knew if my 9th transfer worked, we were going to go transfer into her, and the chances of it working into her were so much higher than me. And that gave me hope. For my 10th transfer, which would be for a living sibling for Jordan, I just like, I'm not desperate. I'm not terrified. I'm not the worst. I feel like, and I know the worst hasn't happened. Like, I cannot even imagine losing Jordan right now at a year old. Like, that would to me be just shake my world more than it's ever been before.
Sure.
But I'm like, okay, I've been through a lot already. Like, if a transfer doesn't work at this point in my life, like, it's not going to break me. And I feel so grateful for Jordan. I feel so happy to have him here. I feel so filled. I really do believe that for our family, having another child and giving Jordan a sibling is the right decision for us. It's not for everyone. I understand that. But for us, it's what feels right. And it's what we want to do. So it's like this weird, like, we know we want to do it, but if it doesn't happen, at least we can say we tried. So I don't think, and then my husband and I are on the same page, we have spent so much money on IVF,
I'm sure.
That I don't think we feel the need to get a gestational carrier if my next 4 transfers don't work. If we run out of embryos, I think we're done. I think it's, we don't want to put ourselves through that. We don't want to take away from our living son. We're going to try with what we have. And if it doesn't work, we move on. And there's not that like desperation there that there was before.
Right.
And some people, I think it's so different too. Like, a lot of my friends go through secondary infertility where they get the first one easily and then they have to do IVF for the second. And I think that's like they're entering the IVF world for the first time and they're going through all that with a living child. And I think that's really complicated and scary. Because a lot of my friends are like, well, I was so desperate for that second child with IVF. And it was our first time doing IVF and we just wanted it to work. And so I do think it's just kind of a different journey when you've already gone through it and you've gone through it so much. I just know that I'll never do 9 transfers again. Like, we have 4 embryos. I'll do 4. Even that's like an insane amount of money. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think the idea of like that desperation, I know I had that level of desperation to bring Emma into the world. And then afterwards, it was like, okay, have a living child. Again, like I want to give her a sibling. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. My problem was never personally like getting pregnant. It was like keeping the baby and bringing them into the world. But my anxiety was still there. There was still like, I don't know if this baby will like come into the world. Like some of those beliefs never changed, but the anxiety was really not there as much. It was not that desperation. It was such a completely different experience. I'm so grateful that like after going through such traumatic losses that it's possible for all of us to not experience that same level of trauma in a subsequent pregnancy.
Yeah. I feel like I needed Jordan, and I don't feel like I need, like, it's just not the same. It's just totally not the same. And I think when you've already been hit with so much trauma and so much PTSD and just such a crazy journey, like little things don't feel so big. What we think is little, that might be someone else's big, right? But for us, it feels little in comparison to what we've already been through. So it's like, yes, a failed embryo transfer is a horrible thing, but I'll be okay. Like I've done it 7 times before.
Which is honestly wild to say. Like, I'll be okay having
it's a lot.
Yeah.
Alyssa, I'm curious, before starting IVF, did you have friends, family, anybody close to you that had been through it that kind of helped guide you? Or were you just like, this is what we're going to do, we'll learn about it as we go?
We didn't have a lot of friends who had done it. No, a lot of our friends were kind of, and it's interesting because I was 30 when we started trying, and that's considered young in San Francisco. Like people don't really start trying when they're 30.
That's I think like same in LA too.
Yeah. And a lot of our friends were like very focused on career and traveling and buying a house and things like that. And, you know, I was 30 and my sister-in-law is 15 years older, and she had reoccurrent pregnancy loss, very early reoccurrent pregnancy losses. And they went through IVF. They did an egg retrieval. And then it was kind of like they got 2 embryos and both worked, and they're my nephews. So
wow.
Yeah, she like kind of set me up for like what to expect, but I actually started my Instagram page as I was going through the retrieval process because I wanted to connect with other women, and I found the Facebook groups to be really like a hostile environment. So that's when I started my Instagram page. I would say we kind of just like jumped into it, and the doctor was like, well, you get your cycle regularly. This was like maybe May, and in June they were like, let's start stims and get your embryos. So I remember talking to my sister-in-law and her just being like, my situation's so different than yours, but like, this is what to expect. But we just kind of jumped into it. And then it was like so interesting because during our journey now, like all of my friends have kids that are older than us or older than ours because they all started trying and all naturally. During that time when we were in IVF. And that was like the hardest part for me, was like being lapped by all these people who would just easily get pregnant and have living children around the same ages that all of my children should have been. But none of them have had to go through IVF or have really had to go through IVF.
Happy Monday, everyone. Just wanted to give you an update on how Jordy's doing. So thought I'd just jump in right now and give it to you here. I will say this week has been really hard. It's been really hard for me, and it's been even harder for Jordy. I was supposed to fly out and visit her, and Hank was going to fly home to be with Brody. And then fucking COVID just had to like mess everything up. And because Hank has COVID and the flu, and we're only certain that Jordy has COVID, they have to quarantine from each other. So it's just shit on top of shit. And Jordy is having a terrible headache, fatigue. It's like all of the symptoms she had directly following the infusion is happening again. So it just sucks. And I feel like so sad and helpless of like there's nothing I can do to really help. I like Alex and I ordered her bath supplies because we know when she's not doing well, she takes baths. I just don't even know what else to do. Like I would show up in a hazmat suit if I could. I had her son come over the other day and I just held him so tight and I just feel sad. And Brody's missing Jordy and Hank so much too. Like this week was hard for him because he was expecting his dad to come home and was so sad when he found out that he wasn't. And even the other day when my daughter Emma and Brody were on the swings together and my husband Ramsey walked outside and Emma's like, "Hi, Daddy." And then Brody, without thinking, just said, "Hi, Daddy." And then he paused and was like, "I miss my daddy." And I said this, and Hank's brother, Eric, who's Brody's uncle, we were just like, "I miss him too." And then Brody said again, "I miss my daddy." We said, "We miss him too, Brody. We're going to see them really soon." And then we continued to swing and it was fine. But it's just feeling extra heavy this week. So, Jordy, if you're listening, I love you. And I know anyone else who's listening, just send all of like your energy and positive vibes towards Jordy and Hank because they're needing a little extra love right now. So thanks for listening to the update. And I'm feeling hopeful that Jordy will be well enough to like plan something to record. Last night we were FaceTiming. She called me because I think she was worried about me, which is insane. I texted her hearts like, "I love you. I miss you." And I think she needed to check on me, which is just wild because it's really about her. But we were cracking up and she was like, "See, we need to be recording this." But it's just hard to know which moment she's going to be well enough to like actually plan something. So hopefully we can plan something more official to give you all an update next Monday.
Did your OBGYN, just, your normal doctor, were they in agreement with you jumping right into IVF and, not waiting the typical year that some people say you should wait to try naturally?
Yeah, I remember we were like getting ready to go on our honeymoon because we got married in December and we took a spring honeymoon because we wanted to go to Europe when it was like warm. And I remember being at the doctor and seeing an NP for something that was like unrelated. And she was the one that was like, "You know what? I know they say wait a year, your anatomy is a little weird. I'm gonna recommend that you talk." It was at Kaiser, and she was like, "I'm gonna recommend that you talk to the Kaiser Reproductive Center." And their wait was like so long, and I knew I wasn't happy with Kaiser, so that's why we just went private. And because when you go private like that and you don't have insurance coverage anyways, like nobody cares what you're doing or who your OB is or your doctor or anything like that. So I didn't really have to tell anybody. And then I switched to UCSF and my OB, like, you don't really need an OB when you're going through IVF. So it just wasn't like a thing for me. But I know some people's OBs like roll their eyes or like will refuse to do IUIs and things like that. But one of the good things, and that can be really hard when like you're trying to get insurance coverage and things like that. The only good thing about paying out of pocket is you just do whatever you want and nobody's going to stop you because they're taking your money, right? So that didn't matter.
That makes sense. I know that with like your just like hearing the facts of all of the things that you've gone through over since 2018. That's when you started. Is that right?
Yeah, 2018. Because we got pregnant in the end of 2019 finally.
Okay. So like thinking about all the things that you've been through, other than your reproductive journey where there's been grief, like where else has grief shown up in your life because of doing IVF and losing Cole?
Well, my mom lost a baby in the 3rd trimester. She lost a baby boy. They didn't have genetic testing or anything back then. But looking back after she saw what I went through, the doctors were like, there's no telling, but like we can probably say it's the same.
Yeah.
And she was like, you're just so lucky that they find, like, our family is so lucky that we finally pinpointed it, because then this meant that I'm the oldest granddaughter and grandchild and niece. And so everyone was able to test in my family. But anyways, I think that was like, I never really thought that like about my older brother that I should have had. And I think that has been kind of hard and sad and like a lot of different feelings. And I'm sure my mom has gone through a lot of different feelings seeing me go through a similar loss. And then, you know, she didn't get to ever have a boy. It's me and my sisters, and I did. So I'm sure there's a lot there. And then my best friend, she was due, I was due July 17th, so 2 days ago, or July 15th, 2 days ago. She was due a week later with a boy, and her boy's living.
Yeah.
And I wasn't able to meet him until his birthday last year when I was very, very pregnant with Jordan. Actually went into labor that weekend.
Wow.
So that, she was amazing. But the grief and the trauma that I went through dealing with something like that, like one of my best friends from childhood literally has a boy that would have been only 2 weeks younger than our son who we lost, who's not living. So managing that, like the boundaries, the expectations, all of that, and then what I think of and feel when I see him, or talk about him or think of him. And then I was pregnant with my sister, and my sister doesn't carry the genetic defect, and her daughter is turning 4 in November. And so she was just a few months behind me. And my niece ended up being the first living child in the family. So that was really hard. That first Christmas with her and first Christmas without our son was really hard. And then going through COVID, I lost Cole the first week of shutdown. Sorry, Jordan is like not sleeping, and he should.
Oh no.
Something's off. He's having the weirdest few nights, I think, because he's about to turn 1.
Oh yeah, there's like there's so many regressions.
Happening.
Oh,
they just keep coming, guys.
They just keep coming. The regressions just keep coming.
At 10:30 p.m. last night, he was screaming.
Oh,
and
no.
He never does that. He is like a fall asleep baby on his own, sleep through the night. And
right, so you're like something must be wrong.
Like, what do we do? Like, what? And I'm trying to wean, and he needs to nurse. And I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. So I don't know what's going on with him. And we've also been traveling a lot, so he's just thrown off. Anyways, navigating it during COVID, literally shutdown was the week before I had Cole. We were racing to Whole Foods to like get the toilet paper off the shelves, like get the food, like hunker down. They didn't know what, like I was one of the first people to like have a baby and like lose a baby during COVID at the hospital. Like they did not know how to deal with it. And it was insanity. So that of like being stuck in your like grief bubble at home, which I'm sure you guys know is so comforting, but at the same time, it's not really healthy and it can be really isolating. And so navigating grief through COVID and through isolation was really hard. And then navigating grief differently than my husband, who really wanted to throw himself into house projects, wanted to throw him into things that he could control, worked through it all, was very put together and strong for me. And then me, who felt like I was falling apart, had to take 8 weeks off of work, couldn't go outside, couldn't leave my husband's side, was like falling apart. And I would just wake up and be like, how are you getting up and signing on to work? How are you holding conversations with people? Why do you care about getting a new refrigerator right now? Like, why? And it's because that's how he was grieving. Like, what can he control? What can he fix? What can he change?
Which is so common. Like, the partners grieve so differently.
Exactly.
But when it's like your partner, it feels so much different and like so real.
And so that, I think that for sure, like those things, like navigating friends, pregnancies who continued on to have living children, navigating my sister having the first grandchild after us losing Cole, and navigating my husband's way of grieving, and navigating it all through COVID. Like, I've learned so much about the grieving process.
Yeah. I just think the grief like transcends the loss, and like it makes sense when you're thinking about like your best friend, like how sad that you weren't able to like experience all those things with her, like alongside her. And like you also like lost the identity of like you being the first to have like the first grandchild. Like there's so many like identity things that you lost, and the secondary losses like live on for so long, which can just be really, really hard to get through.
Yeah, it's just a lot. Like it just affects every part of your life, and it affects how you mother after, how you experience pregnancy after, how you form relationships with pregnant friends, all of that. And yeah, it's hard.
It's so hard. I was thinking like I got pregnant with Emma like right after Shayla died. And so some of the things I got to keep identity wise, like my child like still was the first grandchild.
Yeah.
And my Jordy was like got pregnant like 10 weeks after me. And I remember like was like, I hope she doesn't get pregnant before me. Like, I just couldn't stand like someone else, any of my friends getting pregnant before me. And it's like, you have no control over that. Like,
none.
But then you're like seeing your friends like live the life that like you should have had.
You should be living. Yeah. And I like, with the second, I don't really feel it, but I'm like, okay, none of my friends are really trying right now. Maybe one for her first, but I was like, I've been lapsed so many times now after 4 years that I don't think about that as much anymore, but I was obsessed with it. Like I was so scared to get the text. And I remember my friend who she has a son who's Cole's age, and then she got pregnant with twins. And I just remember like, and I lost twins after my first transfer or sixth transfer. So I just remember being like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And like, no hostile feelings towards her, but just like, I was so angry. I still wasn't pregnant yet. Like the twins are older than Jordan. Like and another one of my friends got pregnant with her fourth. And I was like, how are these, how are my friends like not experiencing any loss or any, like, they're just getting pregnant. And then there's me who like cannot get pregnant and cannot keep a pregnancy. And so that has always been really hard. I totally agree. It's like, please don't get pregnant. Please don't get pregnant.
Social media sucked for a really long time.
Yeah, especially around the holidays. And like, I remember right after I lost Cole, I went into this, like, I'm going to get pregnant again super fast. It's going to work. We're going to be fine. And then the first transfer after him didn't work. And then the second transfer after him didn't work. And then the third transfer. And I was like, we're not fine. And people are getting pregnant and I'm not. And like this site, like you just spiral.
Yeah. The spiraling is quite terrible.
Yeah. It sucks.
I'm curious, like, is there something that's been the most surprising for you about your grief?
How it ebbs and flows, and how parts of it have become harder now that I'm a mom, because I now really know what we lost.
Yeah.
When you lose a baby that far into pregnancy, it's so obvious to you what you're losing because you're so pregnant. And then especially when you get to like hold your baby, like it makes it very real and you have to leave the hospital without it. But everything past that point is like a dream. Like you don't really know what you're missing out on, just that you're missing out on something. when I had Jordan, it was so, I then knew like what it felt like and what I actually was missing. And I don't know, there's like one way isn't harder, but then like it makes me so sad for friends who I've met in the community who never have a child. So they never get to experience that or know what they're missing. And it's like, what's worse, knowing what you're missing or not knowing? It's like so hard both ways. But that I wasn't surprised. I was surprised about that, that it would come crashing down on me, like even after Jordan was born and healthy.
That makes sense. And I like just thinking about like you, and I mean, Jordan's so young. He's almost a year. So it's like hard to think about these things. But I was just thinking, because your mom had a baby who died in her 3rd trimester.
Yeah.
Like, how did she tell you about your brother? And like, do you ever think about how you'll talk about Cole?
Yeah, my mom brought it up a few times when I was really young. It wasn't like openly talked about. My dad never really talked about it, and still like he does sometimes, like when we're talking about my journey, he'll be like, well, when we, but it wasn't talked about much.
Right.
Especially back then. And I think my mom went on to get pregnant with me very, very, very soon after. And then my sisters are 17 months younger than I am. And so she got pregnant with twins like very soon after me. And so they were just kind of like thrown into this like crazy world of like 3 girls under 17 months.
That's really wild.
Yeah. But like I've never, they don't talk about him much. For Cole, like I have his ashes in an urn like on our nightstand, and like they have the same middle name, like Cole Joseph and Jordan Joseph. Like we will include Cole's name into a little girl's name if we have a little girl. All of our friends talk about him a lot. And so I think we plan on really like telling Jordan and talking about him. I think it's just also more accepted now, and more discussed and talked about.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you thought it was maybe just a generational thing of it not being discussed before.
I think so. And all the kids in our lives know about Cole too. And it's like, was really sweet. One of my best friends was just over, and she had a very, very early loss, in between her 2 girls. And they were talking about how her youngest, Clark, is a rainbow baby and Jordan's a rainbow baby. And her older one was like, well, I want to be a rainbow baby. Why am I not a rainbow baby? And then we were like explaining to her like what it means to be a rainbow baby and how like it's actually, like, yes, it's special that we have these rainbow babies, but it's really good that you're not a rainbow baby. And, it's discussed. Like that's discussed.
You just like integrate him into your everyday life.
I think, like we'll talk about him. I'll plan, like we have rainbow baby books. Like we'll probably continue to celebrate his birthday in March. Yeah. I have friends that discuss their kids way more, like have like little, like on Instagram, I'll see like they have like incorporated their kids into their other kids' rooms, or like, have like a little like tombstone or something that they go and like, bring flowers to, or stuff like that. And we don't necessarily have that, but like we will talk about him and his name and whatnot.
That's very beautiful.
Yeah. I think it's hard. Like some people I've met in the community, like actually have like burial services and, like a grave site and things like that. And their kids go multiple times a year. And we don't have that.
Yeah, I don't have that either. I think I'm maybe in alignment on you. Like I have this necklace, and my daughter, she's 2.5 now. So she always looks at this, and I tell her like, this stone is for Shayla. This stone is for you. This is for Ryan. Like we talk about her, but as they get older, it's like made me think about how I used to talk about it like so freely. And now when I talk about Shayla, I see her looking at me. And I think there's just like this idea of like protecting my children from like the trauma I faced. It's such a weird balance that I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah. It's when I talk about it with like our godchildren and stuff, like it's always hard of like how much you share. And
Yeah.
like they ask a lot of questions like, well, why?
Yeah.
How? So we don't have to figure that out quite yet.
No.
But there's definitely like I wear a necklace with Jordan's initials, Cole's initials. I have some with Cole's name. I have things that are like jewelry of me, like, you know, all of that. So
Well, I appreciate you sharing so much about your journey. And Jenny, do you have any other questions?
No, I appreciate it too. And I just think you're such a resource for so many people. You know, both you and Erica helped me come to my decision. Unfortunately, Erica said to me, you know, I would never put myself in the situation to have to terminate for medical reasons.
Well, I remember Jenny called me. She was like, so both my husband and I are carriers for cystic fibrosis. Like, if I have to terminate early, do you think it will be like less traumatic? And I was like,
yeah.
no.
And that was the second I was like, okay.
And it's like you only know what you know, right? Like it
Yeah.
doesn't matter if if the only loss you've had is like a chemical, that loss is going to feel so heavy and the heaviest to you. If the only loss you've had is, you know, a 23-week loss and someone else has had a 36-week loss, like that, your 23-week loss is going to feel so heavy for you too, because even though it was sooner than a 36-week loss, like that's what you know, that's like the deepest grief, you know. So I always tell people the same thing, like yes, the money of IVF and the waiting and the trauma and it's like the PTSD, all of it sucks, but I would never put myself in the position of having to do that again. Like that, it was not worth, like I was like, I don't care what I have to do to test, I'm going to test.
I was given medical, I'll put in quotes, advice from an OB that I saw once and then left, who said ignorance is bliss about testing for the genetic purposes. And I obviously
oh my God, I was
away.
like, Jenny, you need a new doctor. And then she found out they were both carriers.
Yeah, it's so sad and so scary. I have a friend who has 2 uteri and one of hers is underdeveloped, and her doctor was pretty much like, because it's underdeveloped and the other is small, like we really would like you to do a gestational carrier. Your risk of late loss is pretty high. And she called me and she's like, I want to talk to you about late loss. And I was like, don't put yourself in that position.
Yeah.
Also, you have the same condition as I do. Like, please go get genetic testing.
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
please get a whole exome gene sequencing ran on you. We live in an area where you can get it at the hospital. Like, please do it. Like, I know so many doctors will just tell you that this is because of how you developed in the womb. But like, I'm here to tell you that like,
that's not always the case.
It's not always the case.
Yep. Well, Alyssa, can you tell us about Healthy IVF and your Instagram and where people can find you?
Yeah. So I started my Instagram Healthy IVF, I think in 2019 when we were going through IVF. And I just wanted, it's so funny. People are like, why Healthy IVF? And I'm like, I just wanted a place where like, when you go through IVF, it feels like you're not in control of anything. So for better or for worse, I would throw myself into what can I control? Fertility diet, like swapping out products that I use at home, making sure there's no fragrances or chemicals, like all things that we know there's research that links to infertility. So I was like, let me create a healthy, safe space for women to go. That kind of like helps us focus on things that we can control. And then it just like morphed into IVF after loss, IVF not working, IVF for genetic reasons. And now and then pregnancy after all that. And now it's very much a space where I just share my motherhood journey. And then now, hopefully subsequent pregnancy, for sibling. And, I'm kind of in that weird space of like, I had to get over like, okay, this is I can't, like, yes, I know the community, it's hard for the community to see someone have success and be a parent after, but like, that's where I am in my life. And that's the content I'm going to share.
Right.
So, it's very much like a motherhood space now.
Yeah.
And
People are growing with you though. Like
and it's so
really,
fun.
really
And
cool.
so many people are like, oh my gosh, I can finally talk to you about this. I've been following you since the beginning, but mine worked and yours didn't. And I felt so bad. And so I was like rooting for you silently. And now we can talk about motherhood. And it's so fun. And I would say, like, it's so cool because they also have experienced a lot of what I have and went on to have success. And now they're just like, yeah, you've had success, so let's chat.
Yep.
So yeah, definitely more of an emphasis on motherhood. But I try to support women going through IVF. I'm about to start IVF myself. And yeah, it just is.
And you do
hopefully
one-on-ones?
a safe space.
Is that?
I do. Someone just messaged me and they're like, I don't see you post about it anymore. I need to start posting about it. We were traveling. I do one-on-ones with women to just discuss, like, what tests should you be asking for? What questions should you be asking your doctor? What doctors are there in your area? What surgeons are there? Like, what tests can you do on your own? Because now there's all these companies, like I just did Fertilisis, and that I did on my own. So just kind of trying to help navigate the world of IVF and pregnancy after IVF and all of that. Not medical advice, but just like my supplement research and things like that.
No, and I can attest to, the one-on-ones, that's where we met, and it was useful, helpful, things I never knew, wasn't advised about necessarily. I did acupuncture for the first time because of you. So,
I'm so
if anybody's
glad.
listening to this and, you're on the fence and have questions, I would highly recommend reaching out to Alyssa.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like I think I've done like over 300 now, and it's been so fun and also sad, but like, yeah, and there's a sliding scale, and like I need to figure out a better way to like really present it to people. But that is a goal of mine for this year. But yeah, I do one-on-ones and whatnot.
And we'll link everything to the episode so people can find you. And that's Healthy IVF. And I'm just so grateful that you came on to share your story, and so glad that we got to connect in a different space other than Instagram.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so happy that we were able to connect and that we're just spreading awareness around PGTM and weight loss and, termination for medical reasons and IVF, but also pregnancy in general after loss without IVF and all of that. I think it's so important that just every part of the journey has a voice because everyone's journey is so unique.
Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Erica.
We should so we're using one mic.
Yeah.
And we have tried this a few times, so bear with us.
But you did hit record, right?
I did hit record. So anyway, Jenny and I have known each other since we were 14. And we ended up going to college together. We roomed together for 3 years.
Yeah, 3 years. It was a fun time. You were my favorite roommate.
I know, which I think we say again. But yeah, you were my favorite roommate too, other than my husband.
Oh, well, yeah, we'll go with that too.
Yeah.
And children.
Right. I don't even know if they're my roommate. I don't even know what they are. Okay, so but I thought that earlier today we went to soccer bit.
Yeah, it's very unique in there. It's just like white walls. It's very sterile looking.
It is. It kind of looks like a little doctor's office.
I was wondering where you were taking me. And then there's just like walls of candy, and it all looks the exact same.
I know I had to tell you which ones to get. I was like actually pretty directive. Yeah, here's our candy and our ASMR. What's your favorite one, Jenny?
I don't know the names like you do.
Okay, describe the color and texture.
Was this one good?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, you thought it was weird.
It's gummy. And it's, let's see. It's sour. It tastes like sour Oh, that's a unique flavor.
This is what you said earlier. And you're like, you're like, maybe it's fruit punch. I just don't know.
I think it's like a sour fruit punch.
Okay, we'll go with that.
You want to try it?
I think I'm going to ask Jordy for confirmation. It's red and white. Is there like, I don't know. Anyway, while we were leaving soccer bay, Jenny's like, oh, I know what my pet peeve of you is. Can I share it? Okay, like everyone just loves sharing what their pet peeves of me are. So Jenny, go for it. What's your pet peeve?
Ever since I've known you, we order food or we pick up food and you have to start eating like before you're settled. Like I would get into the car with my bag of food. I would take it home before I start eating. You literally just like ripped open your bag of soccer bit. You were going to put the baby in the car and didn't even get to that point.
I just like needed a piece of candy.
I took one piece of candy and then went about your day. You just like have to take a bite of something before it seems like an appropriate time to start.
So people have like a lot of opinions on my food. Also, I realized that Jordy's made me like extra aware of when I go like too soon, and I for sure did that. But I was like, fuck, Jordy, like. Now I think about it all the time when I eat something and I'm like, right away. And she thinks it's too soon. And now I'm going to be thinking I'm eating too soon, but then I'm leaving one bite. Yeah.
Like you say before you know if it's actually good.
Yeah. But like I clearly know it's good. Why else am I saying I don't know. I just am.
I don't know, but like I feel like we started our like cooking journey together.
We did. And Jenny, you were like definitely the most accommodating of my food because Ramsey like gives me such a hard time. But we would just eat like couscous and turkey meatballs and broccoli and veggies, and you just embraced me.
And butterflied paprika chicken.
Yeah. But you just embraced me for all the food. You never complained once.
Yeah, there's a reason I don't cook as much chicken these days or turkey meatballs. You're not the most adventurous eater, and I feel like I eat everything.
Yeah.
So
I mean, yeah, you do. So that part is Ramsey's pet peeve. We can just go in all of everyone's pet peeves.
What's your pet peeve of me?
Okay, well, I know I was thinking, I'm like, what's my pet peeve of you?
Was it the one fight we got in ever in our lives?
You apologized for that fight recently. Actually, no, I think it's because I'm a more like assertive person. So sometimes I think my it's not even a pet peeve. It's more, I'm like, tell me how you really feel. Like, you're just so cautious about like other people and how they feel. And I just want to like give it to me kind of.
I'm a people pleaser.
Yeah. So maybe that's my pet peeve.
Okay. That's fair. It's appropriate.
But yeah, it's not so bad.
Your pet peeve's about my personality and mine's just about you liking to eat before.
Yeah, but you had a really visceral reaction to that. It was much stronger than my pet peeve of yours.
Thanks. I hope so. I feel like that would be
hard.
Probably wouldn't be friends.
Probably not. You were there for Ramsey and mine for like our first fight.
Well, I was involved in that first fight. It was partially my fault.
Okay, let's talk about it. So Ramsey and I were dating 4 months. We had never fought before, and we went skiing. And this was like my second or third time skiing in my entire life. and it was just Jenny, Ramsey, and I skiing. And there was like a little fork in the road, and there was a little fork in the road. So there was all these really tall trees, and I went to the right and Jenny and Ramsey went to the left.
Yeah. And then we stopped, and I remember we stopped next to the trees, and Ramsey was like, we should go find Erica. Like, she's going to be really upset. And I was like, no, she'll be fine. And
she was like pretty convinced that I'd be fine. And Ramsey was like kind of worried. Meanwhile, I'm freaking the fuck out on the right side because I didn't know that they were going to come back in together. And I just thought I was lost on the mountain by myself, no cell service, nowhere to go.
this was a not so people pleaser moment of me. I was like, you're going to be fine. But I remember traversing through the trees with Ramsey to go find you. And it's not easy to do on a snowboard.
No, it's not.
But yeah, that was a fight.
Okay, then we came and I was like, why did you go that way? Why didn't you tell me? And then Ramsey's like, Jenny, I knew she'd be upset. And you were there for our first fight, and I wasn't actually mad at you at all. I was really just mad at Ramsey.
I'm glad. We've only had one fight, so.
Right. Our fight was about drinking and driving.
You make it sound so bad.
No, it really wasn't that bad. It was about actually like drinking
Being
and
smart.
not driving.
Yes, I was DDing and had one drink, and the drink was stronger than I thought. So I told Erica I'm leaving her car parked in downtown Boulder, and we will get it in the morning.
And I was just like, well, if you were gonna drink, like I just like wish you didn't drive my car. Like I wish we just would have Ubered instead. But here's the thing, I also had a drink, so it's like I was also kind of drunk. So I just think it's like we can't even discuss it because we were both drinking, and I don't hold it against you at all.
Thanks. My apology from 2 weeks ago makes up for what happened.
Well, because this fight would come up like all the time. That's pretty impressive to only have had one fight.
Yeah. I know.
And like Jordy, like I think I've had like 2 fights with her, and one of them I was 10 years old slapping a seatbelt on her.
Oh, that sounds dangerous.
I was sometimes physically aggressive.
I'm gonna scoot away.
Yeah. But I think that's it. I mean, we've had some pretty good times together. And now you live in Colorado, and that's sad. And you're here in LA, and that makes me happy.
I'm happy to be here.
And our kids are 3 weeks apart, and it's really sweet. And they're like learning how to talk to each other. Wah. That's what they do to each other.
Actually, they almost could have been born on the same day because I was supposed to have my transfer 3 weeks earlier.
Yeah. That's
had it to the day 3 weeks later, and they're 3 weeks apart.
Wow, that's crazy. That would have been wild if they were like birthday twins.
I feel like it would have been so fun, but also like I needed, even though like this wasn't your first kid, I needed you to be a little ahead of me to like help me prepare for what's to come.
Yeah, that's fair. Now you get some nice clothes out of it too.
The best.
Yeah. Okay, well, anyway, I love you, Jenny. I'm glad that you were able to come for this episode. I'm glad that we can be here in person, and I will miss you dearly when you're not in LA. It's so sad. Don't know what to say to that one.
I never know what to say to that. Every time we all get together, you and Jordy are both just like, you could move back here.
It's just because we love you, and it's sad. That's it.
Okay. I'm sad now.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Grief Street. We put out new episodes every Monday. If you'd like to support us, give us a follow on Instagram and TikTok. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel to find the video version of our episodes. Please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts and give us a 5-star review. We would love to hear from you and get some feedback. If you'd like to contact us, please email griefstreetpodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 508-474-3378. That's 508-GRIEFST. Our theme song is Hepcat Jive, courtesy of purpleplanet.com. We'll see you next time.